You don't lack discipline. You're just making too many decisions. And every time you rely on motivation, willpower, or trying harder, you're playing a game your brain was never designed to win. Because here's what no one tells you. The more decisions you have to make, the weaker you become. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because every decision drains something from you. Your clarity, your focus, your ability to act. And by the end of the day, you're not choosing anymore. You're reacting. That's why you start strong and slowly fall apart. That's why you know exactly what to do and still don't do it. So let me ask you something, and be honest in the comments. Do you actually lack discipline? Or are you just exhausted from deciding everything all the time? Because once you understand this, you'll stop trying to become stronger and start becoming someone who doesn't need to. You wake up with good intentions. Today you're going to be focused. Today you're going to follow through. Today you're finally going to do what you said you would do. But then it starts. What should I do first? Should I check my phone? Should I start now or later? What's more important? Do I feel ready? And without noticing that you've already made 10 decisions before you've done anything meaningful. That's where your energy goes. Not into action, but into deciding whether you should act. Most people think discipline fails because they're not strong enough. But that's not what's happening. Discipline fails because your brain gets tired. There's a concept in psychology called decision fatigue. The more choices you make, the worse your decisions become. Not because you changed your goal, but because your mental resources are being depleted. So by the time you reach the moment that actually matters, the workout, the work, the difficult task, you're already exhausted. And in that state, your brain doesn't choose what's right. It chooses what's easy. Not because you're weak, but because your system is overloaded. That's why you can be disciplined in one moment and completely inconsistent in the next. It's not a personality issue, it's a structure problem. And if your life depends on constantly deciding what to do next, you will always feel like you're losing control, even when you know exactly what needs to be done. Here's the part most people never realize. Every time you say, "I'll decide later," you're not postponing the action. You're multiplying the cost of it, because the moment doesn't disappear. It comes back with less energy, less clarity, and more resistance. And now, instead of just doing the thing, you have to overcome the weight of having delayed it. That's how simple actions become heavy. Not because they are difficult, but because they've been surrounded by hesitation. Think about it. There are things in your life that would take less than an hour to start, but you've been delaying them for weeks. Maybe months, not because you don't know how, not because you don't have time, but because every time the moment appears, you open space for a decision, and that decision drains you. Should I do it now? What if I'm not ready? Maybe later. And just like that, your brain escapes. This is how avoidance hides. It doesn't look like fear, it looks like consideration. It looks like you're thinking, when in reality you're stalling. And the more you repeat this pattern, the more your mind learns something dangerous. That action is optional, that everything can be negotiated, that nothing has to happen now. And once your brain internalizes that, discipline stops being a behavior and starts becoming something you're always trying, but never sustaining. Motivation is not what drives action, it's what appears after action has already started. But most people invert this. They wait to feel ready. They wait to feel focused. They wait to feel like doing it. And while they wait, nothing happens. Because motivation is unstable. It comes and goes based on mood, environment, sleep, stress, things you don't fully control. So if your life depends on feeling motivated first, your life becomes inconsistent by default. This is why you keep starting and stopping. Not because you lack desire, but because you're relying on something that was never meant to be reliable. What actually creates consistency is something much simpler and much less exciting. Removal of choice. When an action is no longer something you debate, it becomes something you execute. No discussion, no negotiation, no internal argument, just movement. And this is where everything changes. Because the moment you stop asking, Do I feel like doing this, and start acting as if the decision has already been made. You remove friction. You remove hesitation. You remove the space where your mind escapes. That's how disciplined people operate, not because they feel different, but because they eliminated the moment where most people fail, the moment of decision. If you had to rely on discipline for every action in your life, you would fail. Not because you're incapable, but because no one can sustain that level of mental effort. The people who seem the most disciplined are not constantly choosing to do the right thing. They've simply removed the need to choose. Their day is structured in a way where action is the default. They don't wake up and ask, "Should I do this today?" That question doesn't exist anymore because the decision was already made once, and then it was turned into a rule. This is the difference most people miss. They treat everything like a daily decision, when it should be a fixed system. Think about how much energy you waste deciding things that should already be defined. When to start, what to do, how long to do it, what comes next. Every open variable creates friction. Every undefined moment becomes an opportunity to hesitate, and hesitation is where inconsistency is born. But when something becomes a rule, you bypass that entire process. You don't need motivation. You don't need willpower. You don't need to feel ready. You just follow the structure. And structure is what creates freedom, because when your actions are pre-decided, your mind is no longer overloaded. It becomes focused. It becomes stable. It becomes reliable. Not because you changed who you are, but because you changed how your life is organized. At some point, this stops being about discipline and becomes about who you are. Because every time you leave a decision open, you're not just creating hesitation, you're reinforcing a version of yourself that negotiates everything. Someone who might do it, someone who tries to stay consistent, someone who depends on the moment. And identity is built exactly like that. Not through what you say you value, but through what you repeatedly allow. When your actions are optional, your identity becomes unstable. You don't trust yourself. You don't believe your own plans. You start expecting inconsistency from yourself, and that's where the real damage happens. Because once you stop trusting yourself, even simple actions feel heavy. Not because they're difficult, but because you're no longer certain you'll follow through. That's why structure is not just a productivity tool, it's an identity builder. Every time you follow a rule you set in advance, you send a signal to your mind. This is who I am. Not someone who debates, not someone who delays, not someone who depends on feeling ready, but someone who executes. And over time, that repetition creates something powerful: self-trust. Not confidence based on emotion, but confidence based on evidence. And once that starts to build, everything changes. Because now you're no longer trying to be disciplined. You're acting in alignment with an identity that doesn't question itself anymore. So if this is true, why do most people stay stuck, even after understanding all of this? Even after knowing exactly what they should do? It's not lack of knowledge, it's resistance to commitment, because the moment you remove choice, you remove escape. And most people are not avoiding action, they're avoiding the feeling of being locked into something. They want progress, but they also want the option to not do it. They want structure, but without losing flexibility. They want results, without giving up control over the moment. And that's the contradiction. Because real change requires something most people quietly resist: irreversibility. A decision that is not revisited every day, a standard that doesn't adapt to your mood, a rule that doesn't negotiate. That level of commitment feels uncomfortable. It feels restrictive. It feels rigid. It feels like you're giving something up. And you are. You're giving up the version of yourself that always has a way out. The version that says not today, maybe later, just this once. Because that version survives on open decisions, on undefined moments, on the ability to renegotiate everything. But once you close that door, once something becomes non-negotiable, there's no space left to escape, only space to act. And for most people, that's the real challenge. Not doing the work, but removing the option to avoid it. You don't need to redesign your entire life to fix this. You need to remove a few key decisions. That's it. Most people try to change everything at once. New routine, new habits, new mindset, new goals. And because everything is open, everything depends on daily choice, which means everything eventually collapses. But real change doesn't come from doing more, it comes from deciding less. Start with one area, one action that you know matters, but keeps getting delayed. Not something complex, not something overwhelming, something simple. And instead of trying to be consistent, you eliminate the decision around it. You define when it happens, where it happens, how long it lasts. No thinking required, no adjustment based on mood, no daily negotiation, just execution. Because what you're building here is not a habit. You're building a fixed point in your life, something that doesn't move even when everything else feels unstable. And that has a powerful effect. Because once one action becomes automatic, your mind starts to reorganize around it. Less noise, less internal conflict, less wasted energy. And from that stability, other decisions become easier. Not because you suddenly became stronger, but because you stopped making everything optional. One decision doesn't stay isolated, it spreads. Because your brain is always looking for consistency. Once you establish a non-negotiable action, it starts to influence everything around it, not consciously. Not by force, but by alignment. Think about it. If you wake up at the same time every day, your sleep starts to adjust. If you train at a fixed hour, your energy begins to organize around that moment. If you protect a block of focused work, distractions start losing space. One fixed decision creates structure, and structure creates predictability, and predictability reduces friction. That's how your life begins to stabilize, not through massive change, but through anchored behavior. And this is where most people misunderstand growth. They think they need to control everything, every habit, every thought, every outcome. But that's not how change works. You don't control your entire life at once. You install something stable and let it reorganize the rest. This is the domino effect at a psychological level. One action stops being optional, and suddenly other actions feel less negotiable too, because your identity starts to shift from someone who tries to someone who follows through. And once that shift begins, you don't need constant effort anymore. You need consistency in a few key points, because a stable structure will always outperform unstable intensity. When you stop negotiating with yourself, something quiet begins to change. At first, it's subtle. You don't feel more motivated. You don't feel more inspired. Nothing dramatic happens. But there's less noise, less internal debate, less second-guessing. Less of that constant tension between knowing and not doing. Because that tension was never about difficulty. It was about conflict. Part of you wanted to act. Another part wanted comfort. And every time you opened space for a decision, that conflict had a place to exist. But when the decision is already made, the conflict has nowhere to go. So your mind becomes simpler, more direct, more stable. You start doing things without turning them into a discussion. And that changes how you experience your own life. Because now you're not spending your energy convincing yourself to act. You're using your energy to move. And that creates a different kind of confidence. Not loud, not emotional, but solid. The kind that comes from knowing you don't need to rely on how you feel. You rely on what's already defined. And over time, that removes something that drains most people every day. Uncertainty about themselves. You stop wondering, will I follow through? Because the answer is no longer based on mood, it's based on structure. And that's when discipline stops feeling heavy and starts feeling automatic. In the end, this was never about becoming more disciplined. It was about removing the conditions that make discipline necessary. Because the truth is, you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your structure. If your life is built on constant decisions, you'll always feel inconsistent. If your actions depend on how you feel, you'll always feel unstable. And if everything is open to negotiation, nothing will hold. But the moment you start closing those gaps, defining what happens before the moment arrives, everything begins to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. You stop asking, You stop delaying. You stop renegotiating your own life. And in that silence, something stronger appears. Not motivation, not intensity, direction. Because now your life is not driven by how you feel today, but by what you decided before today even started. And that changes everything. So don't try to become stronger. Don't try to force yourself into consistency. Just remove one decision. Make it fixed. Make it non-negotiable. And let that single point start reorganizing who you are. If this made you see something differently, leave a comment. I remove the decision. Because the moment you stop debating your life is the moment your life starts moving.